So, hello, Litfesters. I'm here with Andy Lane, author of the Young Sherlock Holmes books, and we're here to talk about his new book and also the things he's written in his journal. So, what is it? Why do you think that concept of a lost world, which is what your new book is about, is so enjoyed in popular fiction?
I think it's just that desire that people have to think there is something out there that we just don't know about. If we thought we explored the whole world and there were no other creatures out there ever to be found, it's so disappointing because we kind of know everything. I think there have been points in the past where scientists have said, right, that's it, we know all of physics or we know all of chemistry. But it's not true, because we keep finding new stuff. And I've always been fascinated by things like dinosaurs and the idea that maybe they never died out in certain places. And then when I did some investigations with some biologists and I did some research, I found out that biologists now believe that we only know about 1/4 of the creatures that are alive on the planet. And that's phenomenal. Three-quarters of the creatures out there, we just haven't got a clue what they are. A lot of them are going to be small beetles, but there are going to be some bigger things out there. The romance of thinking there's stuff out there and we don't know about it, so we can go out and find it.
So that cryptids and that kind of the hidden things.
Yes, I've always been interested in the idea of cryptids. The bigger and more unlikely ones, like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot or the Yeti. But also just the idea of you can find a new kind of spider. In the past couple of years, people have found new kinds of slugs or new kinds of wasps in England. So these things are out there, we just never bother looking for them.
And I mean, you've taken on you've done your own interpretation of another Arthur Conan Doyle character with Professor Challenger. I mean, what is it that draws you to all kind of looking at these Arthur Conan Doyle characters through your own lens?
Well, when I was a kid, when I was about 10 years old, the first book I ever bought with my own pocket was A Study in Scarlet, which is the first of the Sherlock Holmes novels written by Conan Doyle. So I've been obsessed with Sherlock Holmes as a character ever since then. And the more I've kind of researched it and thought about it, the more I found out that he was probably the first truly three-dimensional character in English literature. He's so complicated and so unusual and so bizarre, and yet so talented as well. And Conan Doyle didn't create him deliberately. He was an accident. He just needed to make some money quickly to pay his bills. And so to have accidentally created a character who's kept going for 130, 140 years, I think it's just an amazing thing for a writer to do. So he was an odd guy. He didn't train as a writer, he trained as a doctor and then drifted into writing. And he's a man of many contradictions himself. He created Sherlock Holmes, who goes through the deductive reasoning process. But then in his later life, Conan Doyle believed very much in spiritualism and the idea of ghosts and fairies. So he had a lot of contradictions in his own character, and I find that very interesting.
And so what was it which drew you to Professor Challenger for this?
Professor Challenger in particular, I've been talking with my agent, he represents the Conan Doyle estate anyway, and it was he that came up with the idea. He's a big fan of cryptids as well, and I talked about it quite a bit. And he said, well, you've done Sherlock Holmes, why not take the idea of Professor Challenger, but don't do Professor Challenger, do a kind of updated, modern day version with his great-grandson. And I thought that would be a great idea because with Sherlock Holmes, as much as I love him, it's historical, it's period, and it's the one character you're in Sherlock's head all the time in the books. What I want to do with Lost Worlds was to have a modern series with lots of characters where you keep skipping between different points of view, so it's like a bit of an antidote. But it meant I could still work in that Conan Doyle universe, which I really like.
And the thing about these Sherlock Holmes and Professor Challenger, these are very sort of thought-based theories. I mean, they do have some physical aspects, but they're very much thought-based theories. How does that kind of, do you think, affect your writing as opposed to some kind of more action-oriented?
Well, I think it kind of comes the other way around because in the same way that Conan Doyle didn't train as a writer, he trained as a doctor. I didn't train as a writer, I trained as a physicist. My degree is in physics, and I worked as a scientist, a military scientist for 27 years. So the way my brain works is very thoughtful and analytical. And so when I write, I tend to write more thoughtful stuff rather than the action scenes. So you've got to put action scenes in there, and they're fun to write. But I do much more like the kind of thing where the characters are sitting down thinking deeply about stuff. And then there's chasing.
Yes.
Because something explodes.
Those things in situations are always good. You can't go. And so, I wanted to ask about your young Sherlock Holmes books, which you did. I'm sure you've told this story many times before, but what was it? What was it that get you to that led you to come up with the idea of young Sherlock Holmes, as opposed to just writing about Sherlock Holmes as many people have done before?
As you say, a lot of people have done Sherlock Holmes books. And as I was growing up and knowing that I wanted to become a writer, I always wanted to write my own Sherlock Holmes book. But the more I collected other people's Sherlock Holmes books, the more I thought it's kind of all been done. Any variation of Sherlock Holmes you want to think about has been done. Sherlock Holmes solving crimes, Sherlock Holmes is Jack the Ripper, is one of the books that I've got. Sherlock Holmes versus the Martians in War of the Worlds. In any direction you can think of, Sherlock Holmes has been taken. Except that area of his childhood has never really been looked at properly. There was one film back in the 1980s, Steven Spielberg produced film, which frankly is not very good. And there was a very short-lived ITV series around about the same time, Young Sherlock. But both of those things, the TV series and the film, took the adult Sherlock Holmes and projected him backwards. So you've got a 14-year-old who acts just like a grown-up. And I thought that was wrong. I thought it was much more interesting to take an ordinary kid and say, well, what have you got to put this kid through to turn him into the adult Sherlock Holmes? Because he's obviously manic depressive, he's obviously obsessive compulsive. He doesn't like people very much, he doesn't trust women, but he can do all these amazing things. He can play the violin, he can box, he can sword fight, he's a chemist, he's a disguise artist. So what do you have to do with a 14-year-old who's perfectly normal to get to learn all of those things? That I found was just a really interesting area that nobody had really looked at before.
So going back to your sort of more recent Lost Worlds, with the cryptids, what kind of cryptids are you particularly interested in? What can you give us any hints to what's going to come up in later books?
Well, the obvious thing would have been to do what Conan Doyle did with The Lost World, do dinosaurs. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I know I want to do dinosaurs at some stage later on in the series, but I can't blow it straight away with the Tyrannosaurus Rex, because after that, where do you go? So in the first book, I've got this Neanderthal-like creature living in the Caucasus Mountains. In the second book, I haven't told anybody this before, so you're the first. It's giant centipedes. Centipedes about 20 feet long, bright red. So it's the kind of thing that you could potentially find a Neanderthal out there somewhere, or you could find giant insects. They're not completely outside the realm of possibility. So I want to keep in mind that area for a while. But at the end of the day, I'm going to have to do the Loch Ness Monster as a plesiosaur or something like that. Or maybe just little rhinoceros. Actually, when I was doing my research, I found there's this theory in biology that if you isolate a group of animals from everything else, they become smaller. There are legends, in fact, there are actually fossil records of elephants which are about yay tall and small horses. So it occurs to me that if you've got dinosaurs on an isolated plateau like in The Lost World, they're not going to be big dinosaurs now because the food supply will be limited. Evolutionarily, they get smaller and smaller, so they eat less. So if you think of a Brontosaurus about that high, I could do that. I could do a large Brontosaurus.
Isn't there Homo influences that had the similar thing happen to humans? Hobbits. Isn't that why they call them the little humans?
Yes, there are fossil records of small kind of proto-humans, which kind of raises the question in reverse. In the past, were house cats really, really large? Or did we have massive great dogs? Probably not.
With the concept, going back to your young Sherlock Holmes, jumping out a bit, but you kind of, what was it that kind of led you to coming up with some very kind of unusual concepts of those ones? I mean, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read those, but certainly they're not kind of what you normally see in a Sherlock Holmes, the adult Sherlock Holmes books, in terms of the murders and the kind of scale, the scope of them.
Yeah. That's a really good question. It's quite a complicated one to answer. I mean, I think the immediate answer is if I tried to do an entire book that was just a murder mystery of the deduction, it probably wouldn't have appealed to the young adult market too much. You kind of need to have more excitement and adventure. And one of the things I've always been fascinated with Victorian times is that rather grotesque, bizarre edge that they had. Sort strange things that the Victorians believed, spiritualism and monsters and stuff, all alongside the beginnings of science. If you think that at the same time you had Dracula and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but you still have that kind of Frankenstein element of new science, and science can do anything. So I wanted to bring a lot of that in. But actually it's more fun for me to have these big James Bond kind of plots, secret organisations. But Holmes in his later career obviously was very comfortable dealing with big themes, meeting important people, so I wanted to get it in early on. He's done a lot of that stuff. He's not scared of it.
Final question. So say in 100 or 500 or 1,000 years' time, somebody comes along and they pick up one of your books from the wreckage of ruined civilization.
Yes.
And what do you think they think on reading it, and what would you like them to think?
You know, I've never been asked that before. That's a really complicated question. I think of these books as being like precursors to the Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes stories, obviously. So, ultimately, when I finish the series, whenever that is, I want that to be a seamless transition. So the last scene of my book will be the first, effectively, scene of Conan Doyle's Study in Scotland, where Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson meet for the first time. So what I'd like people to realise is that my books are a prelude to something else, and actually something much more important. Because if all of Conan Doyle's stuff was lost and mine was retained, that would be a tragedy for civilization, I think.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much.